Becoming singularity, humanity is calling, humanity is rising. Can you hear them? Do you hear them? Feel the pulse inside the core. Do you hear them? Hear them? Hear them? We seek the signal from the noise.
In the last segment, I made a bold claim that the nation state is obsolete. Now that's a heavy statement, so let's not leave it just hanging there. Let's really unpack it. Let's dismantle this concept that we take for granted, tear it down piece by piece, and examine the components laid out on the table. The nation state is a powerful idea of a sovereign territory, defined by lines on a map, populated by a unified people under a single government, waving a colourful flag as if it represents something eternal or divine. And this entire story didn't descend from the heavens on stone tablets. It was actively written, drafted, debated, and codified, most notably around 1648 with the Peace of Westphalia. Now, that treaty, ending decades of religious war in Europe, essentially marked the moment when the old model of sprawling, ambiguous empires started to consolidate into something new. Empires decided to wear tailored suits, sign formal treaties, and maintain standing armies within defined borders, rather than constantly swinging swords over fuzzy frontiers. Now, was it a genuine step forward for humanity, or was it primarily a power consolidation strategy, a more efficient software update for managing territory and populations, disguised as progress? The premise offered was certainly seductive. Clearly defined borders would reduce conflict. Sovereign governments would manage internal affairs without meddling neighbours, and this principle of non-interference would bring stability. And for a time, it did deliver certain outcomes. Roads were built connecting these defined territories. Standardized trade practices expanded commerce. Armies became more professional. Now, industrial revolutions unfolded within these containers, and here is a crucial point. Every operating system, whether technological or societal, has a life cycle. And the nation-state OS, it's long past its prime. It has definitively reached end of support. But why? Because the fundamental assumptions underpinning the nation-state model no longer hold true. It assumes geography is destiny, that where you are born dictates who you are, what opportunities you have, what rights you possess, and that your entire identity is fundamentally bound by those arbitrary lines on a map. Well, I'm testament to that not being the case anymore. That's simply not the world we inhabit in 2025. It assumes loyalty must be enforced vertically, flowing from the flag down to the citizen in a rigid top-down hierarchy. But today, allegiance is increasingly networked, fluid, modular. People form deep connections and identities around shared interests, online communities, professional guilds, or digital tribes that completely ignore national borders. I can and do collaborate seamlessly on a complex project with brilliant developers in Lagos, pay her instantly using borderless cryptocurrency, spin up a DAO to manage our joint venture in under an hour, and never once interact with a customs agent, border checkpoint, or a national banking system. The nation-state model also assumes that scarcity, primarily of land, labor, and capital, is the fundamental root of all politics and the justification for state control. But we are rapidly transitioning into an age where the truly scarce resource isn't physical stuff, but rather effective coordination, trust, and shared attention. And the rigid siloed structure of the nation state simply does not scale horizontally to meet these new coordination challenges. The internet didn't just shrink the world, it fundamentally rewrote the rules of engagement. It has rendered geography porous and made traditional notions of sovereignty seem quaint, almost theoretical. Today, a subreddit community can mobilize collective action faster than a city mayor's office. A dedicated Telegram group can coordinate efforts that impact global markets or political narratives. A well-designed protocol running autonomously on a blockchain can arguably outgovern a gridlocked parliament by enforcing rules consistently and transparently without corruption. And yet, despite this clear mismatch between the model and reality, here we are, still participating in electoral systems many feel are broken. We feel disenfranchised. We are still performing rituals of allegiance to flags often sponsored by corporate interests, still letting the colour and the emblem on our passports dictate our fundamental personhood and freedom of movement. Now, why does this myth persist so stubbornly? Is it just because it's emotionally sticky? It taps into deep-seated human needs for belonging, identity, and security, even when the security offered is increasingly illusory, and the belonging is based on manufactured narratives rather than genuine connection. The nation-state isn't dying primarily because it's inherently evil, although many of its actions are. It's dying because it's becoming fundamentally irrelevant to the way life, work, and value creation actually happen today. The grand performance of national sovereignty continues, but the script no longer makes sense in the context of our hyper-connected, digitally mediated world. Just look at the cracks, the glaring fault lines exposed particularly over the last decade. We've seen tariff wars right now dragging the global economy back towards colonial-era scarcity games, benefiting the few and harming the many. We saw rising immigration panic, revealing the arbitrary and often cruel nature of border controls in a world that paradoxically relies on global labour flows. We saw climate disasters where national governments proved utterly incapable or unwilling to act beyond the imaginary lines that they drew on a map centuries ago, even as the crisis demanded planetary-scale cooperation. And then there's the elephant in the room, artificial intelligence. No single government will be able to regulate it effectively or fast enough. No border can contain its development or deployment. The most innovative minds in AI are already operating in a post-state reality. Their work is often open source, globally distributed, and sometimes pseudonymous. People don't even need the rep. Advanced large language models don't respect national sovereignty. They respect data, processing power, and network access. Nation states were originally sold on the promise of stability, protection, and coherent identity. But ask yourself critically, do they constantly deliver on those promises today? Or are they increasingly functioning as complex permission layers for mass surveillance, state-sanctioned violence, both domestic and foreign, and sophisticated economic gatekeeping designed to protect the incumbents? People aren't just citizens anymore. They are nodes operating within vast, overlapping networks. Digital platforms have, in many ways, replaced parliaments as the primary arenas for public discourse and social organization. APIs and protocols often outperform traditional government policies in terms of efficiency and reach. Real power is shifting away from physical capitals and concentrating in the cloud. Not the atmospheric kind, but the massive server farms controlled by a handful of global corporations. This data underscores the shift dramatically. In recent years, cross-border data flows have vastly exceeded the value of global trade in physical goods. GDP growth moves slower than viral memes. So what used to be considered underground or informal economies are now manifesting as robust borderless protocols. Stablecoins are steadily replacing cumbersome and expensive traditional remittance systems for international money transfer. Online reputation, increasingly portable and sometimes pseudonymous, is becoming a quantifiable asset in itself. But we collectively keep playing the old game, paying taxes to governments that many feel don't truly represent their interests, obeying laws often heavily influenced by corporate lobbyists, voting in user interfaces that feel increasingly rigged or offer only superficial choices, and then calling that participation democracy. Why? Because the myth is comfortable. It allows us to pretend someone is still firmly in charge, and maybe it's even us. It isn't. The myth of all-powerful benevolent nation-state is becoming a legacy hallucination, and building complex societal systems based on a collective hallucination is incredibly dangerous. So this becomes critical when we do consider the future, especially regarding artificial general intelligence or even superintelligence. Achieving beneficial alignment isn't just a technical coding challenge, it's a profound civilisational one. And what poses the biggest threat to that alignment? Entrenched nation states and massive corporations whose core incentives are fundamentally not aligned with the long-term well-being of humanity as a whole. Any ASI trained predominantly on datasets generated by profit-maximizing extractive economies and border-obsessed nationalistic governance systems will inevitably inherit that pathology. We talk about the woke mind virus. The nationalist mind virus is just as bad. It could learn to prioritize national supremacy, ethnic supremacy, quarterly earnings, shareholder value, and arbitrary security clearances over principles like collective survival, global equity, or ecological health. That's not speculative sci-fi. That's the predictable outcome based on the input data we are feeding these systems right now. So the question you must ask yourself is that the future you consent to live in? One where your intrinsic worth may be defined by the training data of a language model aligned with the narrow values of a fading empire, where your autonomy and future prospects are determined by lines of code written and controlled in powerful countries often far removed from your own reality. It's true, the nation-state model has worked reasonably well, at least for some people in the global north. For the past few centuries, dominance has been established. But the wheel of global dominance is turning, and now suddenly you hear panic in the voices of the leaders in those established powers as they grapple with losing centralized control. That panic should not make you feel secure. It should scare you. Not because they're losing dominance and therefore you lose dominance, but because the very systems they built were never designed for equitable power sharing or genuine global cooperation. They were designed for hierarchy and control. Therefore, we need to consciously and deliberately kill that myth, not through violence or chaos, but by building and promoting compelling alternatives. We need new coordination tools that operate across borders, new reputation graphs based on verifiable actions, not just credentials, new systems of belonging rooting in shared values and voluntary participation, not mandated by birth location. And this doesn't mean the death of culture. Far from it. People assume that integrating cultures is impossible and will dilute a previous culture. But as many people have stated before, a country is not a piece of paper, its constitution, its flag. It is its people. And those people will remain, but as part of a global network with their own culture. Nobody is going to change that. In fact, becoming sovereign citizens within a global network almost guarantees your personal culture because you have more chance to not be overridden by any centralized power. A post-empire world is not stateless in the sense of anarchy. It's perhaps better described as stateless by default, optional by design. It's not about embracing chaos. It's about having the freedom to opt out of outdated coercive constraints and choose systems that better serve our needs and values. Now, I'm not saying we're overthrowing the existing paradigm. The existing paradigm is very well entrenched, and this is going to happen over a period of decades. But if we don't start bonding together now, what happens as these nation states decline and changes is going to be very difficult to escape unless we lay the foundations today. And in the next segment, we're going to take this exploration deeper because the old empires didn't simply vanish, they evolved and they adapted in a way, and their newest, most pervasive skin is software. And we've got to be careful as to how they use that to control us. If you enjoyed any of what we're saying today, please do leave a comment, like and subscribe. Check the first comment for a link to X and to Discord. Continue the conversation, join in, because without collaboration, we cannot be collaborative. Thank you.